Good afternoon, all. We're here to discuss the demand generation dashboard and its future iterations. Currently, I am finishing up work on the SDR dashboard, and then Craig's next focus for me is to improve and rebuild the demand generation dashboard. So what I'm going to do is share my screen of the current DG Dash so that we can review. And Dunk, this is where I want you to chime in about what you find useful, what you don't find useful, and what you might want in its place.
Robert, can we quickly, before we start, can we just go around and say why each of us is here, or at least I'll try to help out, and then that way the roles and responsibilities kind of, I guess, here.
Absolutely. Okay. I will start. I'm Robert Conkey. I'm the marketing analytics person here at GitLab. I am here because I will be the creator and maintainer of the new dashboard, and I'm the maintainer of the current dashboard.
And awesome. I'm Dunk. I run demand generation, and I use the dashboard literally every day and use it constantly in helping us adjust and take a look at the decisions we're making relative to campaigns and the efficacy thereof.
Awesome. Sindhu Tatimatla. I'm part of the finance team, run an analytics team that does cross-functional analytics. So really looking at putting together marketing, product, sales, the whole GitLab departments together in terms of one analytical view. I'm really here from a perspective of tying out, I guess, spend to conversions. Kelly on my team should be working on lead recognition and also lead scoring, understanding which leads kind of convert better. So really trying to get a perspective of the campaigns as well.
I'll go next. I'm Matt Nguyen, digital marketing manager on demand generation under Dunk. I spend money for ads, so I look at the demand generation dashboard pretty regularly to understand efficacy. Are we getting an ROI for what we're putting into our efforts?
And I guess I'll go. My name is Jackie. I manage the marketing campaigns team, so working closely with Matt and Dunk. But like Dunk, we're looking at the dashboard frequently to learn how we can optimize our campaigns and really utilizing the conversion rates, the velocity, the cost per, all the good stuff to determine how we're going to make things more effective in the future.
And I'm Kelly Chen. I'm one of the newest members in Shindu's team. As Shindu mentioned, I will be working on the lead scoring, lead recognition, and also the marketing mix model.
Excellent. Thank you all. So with no further ado, let us dive in. So Dunk, do you want to just talk us through what you find useful? Would you find it more useful for you to drive? Because what I want to hear is from you.
Yeah, I'll might be better for me to drive.
Okay.
If you could stop sharing, and then let me make sure I've got it up. I was just working in it. Hold on a second. Make sure I've got a window with it. And I'm going to share my screen. Got too many windows open. Sorry, it's going a little slow here. All right. So I'm in the demand gen dashboard pretty much every day. It's either the first thing I look at or the last thing I look at. So, but what I basically am doing is I'm trying to understand our trend lines. And so where I find that there's a few things about the demand gen dashboard I love, and there's a few things that I'd like to see understood or corrected. So the first area is I want to understand how many inquiries we drove. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I want to understand how many inquiries we're driving from paid demand generation programs. Now, recently, a change was made to this to say, no, these really aren't inquiries, they're inquiry touch points. One of my first observations is this data is now significantly less than the number of inquiries that we show in GA and in other sources. So I'm not sure I'm in agreement with that change that was made, but it was more, I was told that change was made versus being consulted. And let me give you an example, okay? So if you look at in Alley, which is what we use with PMG, for the period of an equivalent period of time, and I'm looking at a few things, we see a pretty significant delta between inquiries that they're showing versus inquiry touch points. If I look at the number of records that we see in Salesforce, I also see a delta there. So I think one of the things I'd like to do is just reconcile on one source of truth relative to if a demand generation campaign drove the inquiry, it's not a touch point, it's the inquiry. And so, so that would be my first observation, because I'm assuming this is a linear attribution touch point model. Robert, does that make sense to you? Yeah.
Yep. And so what you want to see is a count of unique records, like not have the individual person counted multiple times.
Correct. I don't want the individual person counted multiple times. I just want to have that deduped, right? But our campaigns are designed to elicit a response. We're typically the first response, right, in demand gen. It's a outbound campaign, it's an ad, it's something that we're doing there. So I think that's one thing I'd like to see change. The second thing I'd like to see change,
Dunk,
and this is
I actually have a question on that. Sorry, like this might be a little bit of a longer meeting. I know we have 30 minutes, but I feel like this whole reconciliation exercise is going to be pretty important. So I want to like double click on it a bit. We see inquiries counted in 3 different places. We have in Google Analytics, Marketo, as well as Salesforce. And then on top of that, we also have, or maybe 4 places, because we also have Visible that I believe tracks inquiries and inquiry touch points as well.
Correct.
So it's almost like somebody has to engage in a 4-way reconciliation to say, what are the inquiries that are showing up in Google Analytics? And are they the full set of inquiries we expect to show up given the campaigns that they're coming from that are tagged, right? Because in our audit of Google Analytics, what we found is that certain forms aren't tagged. So if those certain forms aren't tagged, like for example, contact sales is not tagged as a conversion goal. So it's like, okay, are those inquiries really showing up? Maybe they're tagged somewhere in under some variable, but then I feel like even that first exercise will help us get a long way through. So Robert, when you say, it's not just a record count reconciliation, it's a line by line reconciliation. It's to say this particular ID in Marketo maps to this particular ID in Google Analytics and this particular ID in Visible, because all of these 3 systems are kind of working on some form of web tagging. So we kind of need like to understand the overlap between the 4 sources, if you may, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. The next thing I look at it for is to understand how many SEOs, how much pipeline. Now remember, this is all linear, right? So, we get a percentage of the attribution, right? So if there's 10 touches, it could have been 1,000 SEOs that were produced, right? But we'll get credit for 1/10 of that. So I have no issue with that. I would occasionally like to be able to filter, and we do have some filters that you can use in the dashboard that look at things, allow us to look at the view based on W or based on first touch, et cetera, but it's not up here at the top. It's actually a little lower in the report. So you'll see down here, if I want to look at conversions, right? I can look at conversions a number of different ways. And hold on a second here. Sorry, I've got too many. Let me cancel this out. But I do like to be able to look at conversion rates based on an attribution model that's modifiable, because I do find that pretty useful overall. Here it is right here. So you can see we can do W-shaped, we can do linear, we can do U-shaped. So I find those useful because it does give me another sense of, other than the linear attribution model, at least gives me some information that I can use there. There is not a field in the report that I don't use on a regular basis. So I find these all very interesting. I use the table here because I need to do month over month or quarter over quarter analyses. So I basically just take this entire table here and I export it to create my month over month view. How are we performing? So I use it for that. I also look at velocity an awful lot. As an example, when we planned out the campaign for additional commercial spend in June, for SB and mid-market, I had to have a pretty good idea based on the date stamp of the inquiry, the MQL, MQL, SAO, how long it took to get to those stages. So I use that all the time.
So, Dunk, another question. So
Sure.
as we are measuring velocity here, how are we measuring inquiry to SAO velocity?
Yeah, so to me, inquiry to SAO is the combination of inquiry to MQL and MQL
Oh,
to
sorry.
SAO.
Maybe just talk to me about MQL to SAO, because there's not that 1:1 relationship between an inquiry and an SAO, right?
Yeah, if I want inquiry to SAO conversion
Sorry,
rate,
MQL to SAO. I keep saying inquiry.
you're talking about conversion rate or velocity?
Velocity, or even conversion rate, either one.
I get them both up here, right?
Yeah.
So if I have 1,000, right, inquiries and 15% convert to an MQL, right? So I know that's 150.
Oh, so it's not like these. So it's basically, sorry, there's not a 1-to-1 relationship between an MQL and an SAO, right? With me so far. Like, can't say this particular MQL converted to an SAO.
So can I look at the MQL to see if it converted to the SAO? Yes, because there's an account insights tab down below, right? And I can actually look at every single opportunity and where it is, SAO, inquiry, etc. It's a little manual, but you can actually get there. Just depends on your filter selects and what you're looking at.
Got it. My question was a little bit different, because I'm saying, because you could have, say, 10 MQLs, but they all belong to one opportunity.
Oh, you're talking about group behavior, right?
Right, exactly. Because
yeah, so no, we can't, I don't understand group behavior in this dashboard today. So yeah, I don't have a count on uniques versus group.
And how does this dashboard treat group behavior versus unique behavior?
So group behavior is defined based on the lead scoring model that's based in Marketo. And so Amy does do, I'm trying to remember, Jack, do you remember how she handled that? I think she was doing the primary MQL that was registered, the contact that was converted to the opportunity.
For group buying behavior?
Yeah.
I don't think that was implemented, was it? I thought that was it's kind of complicated in Marketo to implement that. So I thought that was part of
it's in the
feature.
handbook, but we'll go offline and rather than answer.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, let me
I'm
take
pretty
a look.
sure she did do an implementation of that because I asked her for that. Okay. I just can't remember exactly how she did it. I thought she awarded the points, the incremental points to the contact that was converted to the opportunity record by the SDR. So.
Got it. So essentially.
Well, let me, Sindhu, can you let
Yeah.
me finish? Okay,
Yes.
let me finish how I use the dashboard. Okay.
Yeah.
I also use the dashboard to understand, right, where we're spending our money and where we're driving results from. And so I use this kind of analysis a lot. I look at the number of inquiries and I say, okay, based on where our spend is, I can see this much of our spend is going on DevOps and this much of our spend is going on GitOps and this much is CI. And then I look at this and say, okay, where am I getting my inquiries from? Where am I getting my MQLs from? And then where am I getting my SAOs from? And you'll see very different behavior, right? So I use that to understand which campaigns do the best job of driving MQLs and SAOs. I care an awful lot about which campaigns drive more SAOs. And so you can see that the campaigns that do the most inquiries are, at least in this selection period, DevOps, GitOps, and then this will be CI, right? But then if I say, okay, well, how well do those convert to MQLs? You see a slightly different sort, right? So in SMB, you can say, okay, yes, DevOps is performing well there. It is somewhat a function of the spend right now in terms of the volume. But I have to do I have to do the conversion ratios based on the spend myself, but there's some charts up there that I get that data from. But then I look at what converts best to SAOs, and you'll see once again a completely different view. So those DevOps campaigns have not yet converted to SAOs. They're typically short. They've only been running for about 30 days. So it takes more time. But I have another tactic here that does a much better job of converting SAOs during the time period that I'm looking at. And that's actually the nurture program. So I use this view here to understand the relationship between the campaigns and the spend, inquiry MQL to SAO. But remember, you always have to put it in context because there's velocity metrics associated with how long it takes to go from inquiry to MQL to SAO with each of those campaigns. Another feature that I use an awful lot is personas. And so each of the campaigns has targets, right, for how many managers, practitioners are we trying to recruit. And so I do look at the distribution of the campaign and say, okay, like the CI use case, largely targeting practitioners, but it was up leveled with some additional messaging. So that looks like a pretty healthy ratio there versus GitOps, right, which is a campaign that mainly the respondents that are coming in are practitioners, you know, a lot less managers and executives. So I then bench that and I look at the campaign itself and look at what the target audience was. And in fact, in this case, it's fine because that's actually who GitOps is going after. Another area I look at is in the given period, how many prospects, right, are still in inquiry stage versus have been placed back into nurture versus our SDR accepted versus qualifying versus qualified, right, as an MQL. And so you can see that I'm always looking to see how big these are getting. Inquiry, we should be firing off additional tactics to them, and we do that. We have them in email nurtures. We have additional things we're trying to get them. They're trying to become an MQL, right? Or we're trying to get them to an MQL. Nurture are the people that are put back into nurture at the end of an outreach sequence by the SDRs, not able to contact them, or it didn't look like it was valid. Maybe they were missing some information, so they'd say put them back into nurture. And accepted is what they're working on. You can see the rest of that. So we look at that data, and I look at it also. Now, the kind of the bubble charts here per IACV is very informative to me because I really use this when we look at our campaign and we construct a campaign. I'm trying to understand from a comparative basis, what are the best performing tactics that contribute to inquiry to MQL conversion versus MQL to SAO and SAO to close one. So this data becomes important because typically we're trying to generate a buyer journey and a sequence, right? And while this doesn't quite give you sequence because it's really weighting based on IECV contribution, it does help us understand, you know, we need to always have a webcast. We always should have some gated content, right? So we try to use this to understand what needs to be in the recipe. What it doesn't give me and what's missing is timing. What's the right timing to provide these? What's the, you know, in a recipe, it's always what order are the ingredients, not just each ingredient and how much. This gives me an idea of which ingredients and how much. It doesn't tell me what the ideal timing is. So that's a gap there. And so there's I think that the other thing I would say is it doesn't give me any data. I have to go to different sources, okay, in terms of how many of these inquiries that are coming in are personal email addresses versus business email addresses. And as we all know, this has become very, very important. Cindy, you found this even in your own analysis, right, as you looked at trials. But let me show you something here, which I think you'll find very interesting. This is looking at just LinkedIn lead gen campaigns that we've been running over the last, basically during that increased spend period. And you're going to see that we have in this particular data set over that 2 weeks roughly time frame, we generated 3,872 inquiries. These are records, I should say. You'll see a few dupes here now and then, but I want you to see over and over again all of the personal email addresses, Gmails versus Hotmails, right? So it's got to be at least, in my opinion, 50% personal email addresses. So what that tells me is we have to do something else, right? So these are not going to get to an MQL, typically because this is a single action. They may not have the right title, and it's a personal email address. And if I could understand that in the demand gen dashboard, then we could sequence the next set of things, right? We could have Jackie's working on an intelligent email nurture. And one of the things we could do is we could fire a specific email nurture to people that don't have a business email address. So then in that context, we could do a couple of different things. We could try to drive them to an activity where it would be okay to ask them for their business email address, right? That would be one thing. Or it drives an action to Evan's team to work on the data append information. What I've seen and observed, and I was going through a working session with one of the SDRs today, is that probably the data append probably works 30–40% of the time. A lot of the time, they're actually having to manually go look in Zoom info. And so I'm thinking about how do we understand that pool of inquiries that came in, because we really don't have that data in the demand gen dashboard. that tells the team we need to take another action with them. Does that make sense? And then the other thing that the demand gen dashboard really doesn't do at all is we believe there's a lot of additional tactics we can do post MQL all the way to the closed one. But we don't really cover that. We don't really show that. So it's almost like post SAO progression tactics or sequencing that we could do. So but otherwise, I'm very happy with the dashboard. We do have, I'd like to be able to change some of the targets, right, based on OKR goals and things. So I'd like to be able to make that easily modifiable. Robert, did that answer your question on how I use the demand gen dashboard?
Yes, that was exactly what I was looking for, Dunk. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, I use it all the time. Jackie, Matt, your observations and things you'd like to see changed.
I think there's a couple things that I think would be helpful. I know at the top we have the month over month like chart where we can see like deltas and like how things are progressing. Like I think during certain periods, either month over month or quarter over quarter. It'd be nice to see. I don't know if we can have like a pivot chart or some sort where we can like create our own chart to see like differences over certain time periods, so that we can have a better analysis of like, okay, we saw something change, what exactly happened, and then we can start to like denote like or pinpoint certain times of period where the like I'll use the example of like inquiry to MQL conversion rate, like when that happened, and then start digging into like why that metric changed so dramatically. That'd be one area. The second area is, I think, how the data is added to the demand gen dash is that it's very prescriptive. Like we have to tell it like what to include. And we're always adding new campaigns, like using the example of like lead gen forms. Like we have to create a new campaign for any lead gen form campaign that we run. So what's a more scalable way to add data to this that's not as manual? I think that's another area where sometimes things aren't included. I'll use the example of like the DevOps campaign, right? It took a little while to get the demand gen dashboard updated with the DevOps data because of various reasons. So how do we do that faster and how do we make it more scalable?
Yeah.
I think on the first question, Matt, to your point on how do you get that kind of change over time, I just changed the selection to be month, and then I can see the month over month changes in not just the number of inquiries, but the conversion rates. So it gives us the actual data there. And I use that a lot. Sometimes I'd like to understand things in a little more prescriptive manner. So it does the weeks also. So like if we've just done a change in lead scoring, I can in fact look at those. So I actually really think we've got that pretty well covered in terms of understanding the trend lines. So I think that answers your first question.
Somewhat. Like it doesn't answer, like I want to be more agile where I can compare different like date periods, right? So if I wanted to compare like this core or Q2 of last year, I can't necessarily do that in this very easily.
Right. So that's why, and this is where what Matt's talking about is I export the data out of the demand gen dashboard. And I just created a Google Sheet here that allows me to simply understand, right, the visual over time, showing all the relevant periods individually. And this data is in the demand gen dashboard. This is just an extract of it, right? So there's nothing here that I've introduced that's new, that's not included. Now, where I do a few things that are included is like I look at things like what percentage of this came from large PubSec versus mid-market versus SB, right? So I do a few things here to kind of pull some macro level trends. But again, these are all available as filters in the demand gen dashboard. So I just do that because it's a little more, it makes it easier for me to see it all in one place. But you know, we already have the filters that are in here, right? So I can filter SMB, large, PubSec, mid-market. I can get the data, right? So it's all accessible to me there. I think we still had some issues with regions, right? Working correctly, Jackie? Or maybe it was the country view wasn't working as well.
That was going to be one of the things that I'd point out, because you covered a lot of things, Dunk and Matt. I have +1 on not having to do some of the manual additions. Like hopefully we'd have all of our campaigns and just all the touch points are coming in without us having to say, put this in the dashboard. But
there has been a lot of just like trying to reconcile what we're seeing in Salesforce, for example, where the sales reps are looking at and where the SDRs are getting the leads, and not always having confidence that it's actually portraying
the same on the demand gen dashboard. So having that reconciliation and that confidence that it's a one-to-one, and we're anything that we're pulling out of the demand gen dashboard will be
the same reflection in Salesforce.
Salesforce, yeah, is the important
yeah,
thing.
that's the biggest.
I think that's been the biggest headache whenever we go into doing QBR prep.
But do you think that relates to touch point, how we're using touch points?
I think it also has to do with what you were just touching on, like is the data matching up, and is it being
grouped properly? Like, for example,
Right.
I think PubSec is referencing a field that maybe wasn't being like,
and this might also be a bigger challenge of having so many different fields that have sometimes transitioned out, but maybe they didn't get reflected in different dashboards. I think that's been a challenge.
Robert, a bug that I've been seeing is if I don't do quarterly view, a couple of the charts and KPIs break. Looks like there's a problem with that.
Okay.
So that might be something to look at. So that I think is and I've seen that consistently for several months now. So if you could look at that, I think that would be helpful.
All right. Can do. One of the benefits of the rebuild I'm going to do is I'm going to be rebuilding the entire dashboard from the TD models.
Yep.
And so a lot of the custom code that Vicky and I wrote for this will be consumed into a TD model, and so will be more stable.
Right.
We'll also have more consistency with things like the region field, the country field, and the PubSec segment, because we'll be pulling from the same source of truth that we've defined.
And kind of a question somewhat along those lines too is, I think we were always intending to hopefully be able to see all touch points in one place. Right now, this is filtered to only choose very specific things that we've told the marketing strategy and performance team to include. And that's what Matt was saying. We have to manually say that. So if anything's even slightly off, I think there's a lot of touch points that we're generating as a team, especially through the nurtures, not the SMB one, but everything else doesn't get captured in this view because of how it's been set up. So if we can actually get that holistic view.
I think it does, Jackie. You just have to select other, right? Now you'll run out of memory really quick if it goes back too far. And you'll get some crazy like attribution in terms of pipeline and close one, because it's looking at everything. But that might be a narrow enough feature. But when you click other, that should be picking up all the other touch points, right, Robert?
That's my understanding of the code, yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'll be doing with my rebuild is either adding to an existing page or creating a new handbook page. And I don't know if it'll be one of the internal ones or external facing, but having a handbook page that details chart by chart what you're looking at, what the filters are, what the fields are, et cetera, so that we can see, for example, all touch points are included if you choose X.
Right.
Yeah, and so an example that I just want to frame, and this is why like it's manual, is for example the GitLab 14 webcast we did last week, and the things that we did around GitLab 14 as a team overall. That used UTM campaign equals GitLab 14. That's not facilitated in this demand gen, like the filters.
It's
so even though we put a lot of effort into driving some of the activities for that, it isn't properly showing just quite all the things that we're touching. And it's not even about credit, but like if we could feel confident about the demand gen and other being selected at the same time and not blowing up the SAO numbers and stuff, I think that we'd probably use that selection for other a lot more frequently, but it just doesn't always make sense against Salesforce data.
Right, that makes sense, thank you.
Yeah, and you can see that right now, Robert, when we select other, it said there were 14,600, right, closed won deals. And that's just since February 1st. I don't believe, even with ecom, we've closed 14,600 deals. So that's something to look at.
Okay, that's a
and
good
then,
call out.
Yep. And then the other thing I would ask for is velocity is becoming very critical to us. And you can see I get absolute velocity for the time period, but I don't really get an understanding, is velocity getting better or getting worse? And so that's an area where, you know, just like I can look at, I can kind of, if I have an explicit target for inquiries and MQLs, right? I can look at, are the conversion rates getting better or they're getting worse? Okay. And you see how we kind of go through the categories here, but we don't show any trend lines relative to velocity. It would be really helpful to add velocity into the comparison table so that I can see any, because when we're running different campaigns, we're looking to see if people are getting stuck or if we've improved, they're getting stuck at a particular stage and therefore improving the velocity.
Gotcha. And would you prefer that in the comparison table, or do you want a trend line chart that shows velocity over time?
I'll take either. Matt, Jackie? Because we do have the trend line chart, that's not working right here.
That might be an interesting way to see it.
Okay. And I'll definitely look at what's going on with the Python code, that's what that error is.
Yeah, that'd be great.
A trend line chart, a velocity trend line chart would be easier to create than adding it to that comparison table. So if you're okay with the trend line chart, then that's probably
that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. That would work fine. And then I think the other thing, so let me tell you what I think, right, is going to happen in this next fiscal year, or actually in the second half of this fiscal year. I think we're going to start doing some demand generation programs with and for channel. So I'd like to be able to know that when I select this, right, if I use this channel filter, well, that's the deal path, right? I kind of want to make sure that that's going to show the programs and activities and the conversion rates, the things that we did, that we handed to the channel partners. Does that make sense, Robert?
It does, and it might not be the deal path filter, but we can definitely
Exactly.
have a channel filter.
Right. Yeah, just a channel filter, so I can track and understand the campaigns that we're doing with channel. And if I could add another filter to that, would also be an alliances filter, because we will be doing campaigns with alliances partners. So today it's kind of hard for me to get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm going to do from this meeting is create a couple of issues so that we can have discussions around how we want to track those things, how they're currently being captured, et cetera, so that we can fold them into the new dashboard.
Yep. And like I said, I think the thing that we talked about here, which is really understanding the recipe. We've got a lot of great data here that's allowed the team to make things a lot better. And the best performing tactics weighted by IECV, right, is great. It tells me what we should be doing, doesn't give me the ideal sequence, right? So Sindhu, that's where some of your analytics team can come in and say, look, if you offer an inquiry the opportunity to attend an upcoming webcast within 7 days, your conversion rate is 3 times higher than if you wait until 14 days, right? So that's what I want to be able to get to for Kelly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I mean, we've got a lot of great points here. We've got a lot of great data here. I use it all the time. So kudos to Robert and Vicky for the great work on this, and to Agnes, who helped also.
Yes, we would be so kind of taking shots in the dark, I think, if we didn't have this data to tell us some optimizations we could make to the campaigns thus far.
Yeah, and Robert moving to the TD data is going to make it so that it is going to match the other data sources that we have, which is great.
And that should help
Robert,
with reconciliation fear.
Yeah, Robert, what's bothering you about the dashboard?
Just that all of the custom code that went into it. It is a spaghetti of code, which is why it breaks. And that is the biggest thing that concerns me, is just how tenuous it stands on these peg legs. And that as more and more dashboards move to the TD model, it's being left behind. And I want to bring it up into our new model so that it's reliable, consistent, and pulling from the same source of truth.
Yeah.
But I love the widgets. I'm really glad that you get such great use out of them. The mileage that you pull from it is fantastic and exactly what someone wants to hear when building a dashboard, because this was a huge project.
Right.
And knowing that you're using it daily, it makes it all the more worth prioritizing rebuilding it.
Great. I'm glad to hear that.
Hey, Robert, this is related but not related. One of the things that I do with PMG is that raw source Sisense report that I export the data from, because they need to tie spend to different like UTM parameters. So I just want to make sure that that comes along with this update as well.
Yeah, having a table of that report instead of having to export from Salesforce.
No, I currently export from Sisense, so it's a source report so it's separate from this, that I export the data and pass along to PMG.
Will you send me a link to that chart dashboard that you pull from, just to make sure I include it?
Sure, I can do that.
But definitely that can be added to this dashboard.
I know Vicky didn't, because there's just such a huge level of detail that's in that report. Like we break it out by day of like what inquiries are coming in by a specific day. So this dashboard, it made this dashboard just load like incredibly slow, and that's why we didn't do that.
I will look at performance, comparing, including it or excluding it, and
Okay.
we'll make that judgment call together.
Okay.
And are you suggesting you would rebuild this in the TD dashboard and it would have a different look and feel, but still have the same elements? Robert, is that what you're suggesting?
Mostly what I'm just suggesting is copying the dashboard in its entirety, leaving the look and feel the way it is, because unless there are elements that you want to change visually, if it's working, don't change it. And what I am doing is restructuring the backend code.
Got it.
Which will, the end goal will be this dashboard simply has the same charts. Like my goal is you don't notice a change when I'm done.
Right.
And I simply have a new code on the back end and the TD stamp at the top of this.
Right. Anything else, Jackie, Matt? Matt, do you want to change the spend to be the spend with commission
No.
on PMG cost? No? Okay. All right.
Well, you can argue it both ways. It doesn't help me to add the fees into it.
Okay.
And then Robert, I pasted the link to the source report in the chat here.
I saw that. Thank you. Well, if there's nothing else, I will. Did I hear someone's voice?
I was just saying nothing on my end. So
Okay. Yeah, if there's nothing else, I'll end the meeting. Thank you all for running long. This is extremely valuable. I'm going to generate a couple of issues and an epic. I think there's an epic already for this, so I'll just attach some issues and tag people in them. And this is next on the chopping block for me as soon as the SDR dashboard is done.
Thank you, Robert, very much. We always appreciate the great help you provide us.
Yes, thanks so much.
Always happy.
Kelly, welcome aboard.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye all.
Oh, you say bye.
Bye. Yeah.